Waltz is to leave his post along with his deputy. So let's come away from that and let's speak to Rina Shah, a political strategist, patiently waiting whilst we were listening to all of that. And Rina, what do you make of these reports? No confirmation from the president so far, but several sources talking to CBS. What do you make of this development?
I am not at all surprised by what seems to be an impending ouster of Mike Waltz. This is something I had expected, but the timing certainly is something that many of us think is quite delayed. The security breach, and let's be clear, it's been called a security breach by some, but it was a serious misstep and labeled as Signalgate, was created by Mike Waltz. It was just a few short weeks ago in March that he inadvertently added the editor of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, to the Signal chat, which was discussing Yemen airstrikes, and that leaked sensitive details. Of course, the Trump administration has said that none of these details were classified, but when you saw what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had put into the chat, which later was leaked by Goldberg and put out to the public, you see what are known as war plans, and I don't know what else to call them. But look, it's also clear to see that Trump initially supported Mike Waltz, and the scandal just eroded Waltz's standing within the White House. And he even had critics on Capitol Hill, such as Congressman Don Bacon, who called Signalgate, as it was dubbed, unconscionable. And I agree with that. It was very serious, and I do believe that Trump is right if he is indeed going to get rid of Mike Waltz.
I suppose perhaps one explanation is that it has given Donald Trump a little time for the dust to settle, to decide on perhaps who replaces Mike Waltz. I was looking at a post from Anthony Zerka, our North America correspondent, talking about the potential, perhaps, Steve Witkoff, his special envoy who's been deployed with the Russian negotiations and Ukraine, with the Middle East, with Iran. Is he potentially a name that perhaps is being looked at here to replace Mike Waltz?
Well, let's back up and look at why this is even happening for just a moment, because I think it's very important here. Trump was very wary of caving to media pressure, as he did with Michael Flynn back in 2017. He hesitated, but ultimately is going to oust Waltz and Alex Wong, who is a deputy there today, because of these internal chaotic happenings. And it's three people within the White House, and one of them is actually not even within the White House, who I believe is responsible for the internal pressure to get rid of Waltz. Number one, it's been whispered that it was Vice President J.D. Vance. It's also Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, as well as far-right activist Laura Loomer, who have all three pushed for Waltz's removal. And they've cited the leak and loyalty concerns. Loomer, as I said, is a far-right activist. She has attacked Waltz's deputy, Alex Wong, and accused him of pro-China ties, and that added a lot of fuel to the fire. So I think when you're looking at the potential replacements, you've got to look at the loyalty bit as well. I think Rick Grinnell, who was acting director of national intelligence, he is a very viable name. Steve Witkoff, of course, is very popular and beloved by the president. He's somebody who is talked about as having given results already to this White House within the first 100 days. But there are some reports out in American media within this hour saying that Witkoff does not want the job. Also, Trump could go back to somebody like a Stephen Miller or Sebastian Gorka, who have been with him since the first administration. They are also names being circulated as possible successors. So any of the names being whispered about right now inside the Beltway all signal a shift toward harder line MAGA loyalists.
That's very interesting. Rina, as you were talking, we were seeing pictures of Mike Waltz arriving at the White House a little earlier. Stay with me, because you were talking about his deputy, Alex Wong. And I want to turn to that because Alex Wong, the National Security Advisor deputy under Mike Waltz, has also reportedly resigned. Now, on yesterday, he was interviewed on Newsnight and was grilled by Adam Fleming on the fallout of that Signal group chat. Have a listen to this.
You were included in that Signal chat, which also included a journalist by accident. Did that make America safer in the last 100 days doing that?
Adam, the key point here is that chat you referenced was about opening up freedom of navigation and executing an operation that so far has been very successful, taking strong action, again, against the Houthis, a terrorist organization that is holding at hostage and at bay Red Sea freedom of navigation that hurts the world. We've taken strong action. The president led on that, and we're continuing to do.
Well, and that conversation also was opened up to a journalist and opened up the potential of a massive security breach as well, to be fair.
Well, to be fair, we are executing a military operation. And going back in these 100 days, there are iconic images that we have here. We have President Trump, again, standing side by side with Prime Minister Modi in the Oval. We have Mark Foley, an American held in Russia, returning with the American flag draped around his shoulders. And we had just this past week, President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine sitting in St. Peter's Basilica in an iconic photo. These are iconic images because President Trump is moving with haste. He's moving with strength to strengthen the United States. And when the United States is strong, the world is safe.
Well, that was Alex Wong speaking to Newsnight only yesterday. And if these CBS reports turn out to be true, he too has gone alongside Mike Waltz. Let's bring in Rina Shah again. It was interesting listening to the answers there. And we heard this from the administration at the time when so many questions and focus around Signalgate were being thrown around. The administration constantly referring to the success of the mission. Did they ever acknowledge, the White House, the mistake that this was?
The White House never acknowledged this serious misstep. And what it did was signal real incompetence for a critical role. So you would think that this decision to oust Waltz would have been taken swiftly by Trump. But again, what we saw here was a doubling down by this White House, not admitting to the mistake, instead trying to pivot. The messaging was really horrible on every front, in my estimation. And look, I want to be very clear here that I cannot overstate the impact of far-right activist Laura Loomer, who was routinely trafficked in conspiracy theories. She has tremendous influence in this White House, and she attacks Alex Wong with xenophobic rhetoric. She continues to do so on the platform X, formerly known as Twitter. And that is what ultimately pressured Trump to act against Waltz. And what we really have never seen in this modern presidential history is such an undermining of a capable official advisor within the White House.
That's really interesting, and we were showing just pictures of that Signal chat as you were talking, because the White House has been so desperate not to be pushed around by the media, but it's very interesting in terms of your analysis about sway from different quarters.
Yes. Look, this is very intriguing. This goes beyond a palace intrigue story. I've been saying from day one that to get rid of Mike Waltz would be highly justified. Like I said, I'm dissatisfied with the timing the president took here. And I also should be clear, I am not advising the White House on this. But when you lose the principal's trust, it's hard to get it back, because Trump was frustrated with what was he called an embarrassing, quote unquote, embarrassing blunder by Waltz. It was amplified by his chief of staff, Susie Wiles' distrust, and then that pressure from Vice President J.D. Vance. That all justified a very swift removal in order to restore team cohesion. But at the end of the day, it really was this reckless signal leak that compromised sensitive war plans, that made the Trump administration, that is very security conscious here, make Trump feel like he has to demand accountability from someone. So he's looking at the right person, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there's so much broader internal chaos within this administration. There was talk of neocon suspicions. You know, Mike Waltz was a former member of Congress. He has past ties to former Vice President Dick Cheney, who served under George W. Bush. And also Mike Waltz used to support Ukraine. That raised a lot of doubts among the MAGA purists. And so the signal leak, all it did was expose his questionable judgment and his neoconservative leanings.